The Radio Forest Podcast, online at kkgl.com.
Forest, it's Alicia Dennis. How's it going with you?
Good. Let's talk about serial killers. Should we get right into it?
Let's do it. Let's jump in.
So you've got this TV show with People Magazine, Investigate Surviving a Serial Killer. How did you find all of these surviving victims? Because some of them have really waited a long time to tell their story. How do you find people like this?
It's a good question, Forrest. We dig into these cases across the board because, that's something that we've done at People Magazine for years, and definitely in working on the different shows that we've brought to Investigation Discovery. And it's important to us to listen to victims' families, to talk to those people that were there in these cases from the very beginning. And what we found was that these survivors, people that did somehow manage to escape an encounter with these monsters, many times want to tell the stories, want to express these things in their own words, but it takes them sometimes years to feel strong enough to do it. And so sometimes in these cases, it will be over the course of a long time before people come back to us and say, okay, now is when I'm ready.
Are they connecting then with other survivors? Because I know in the first episode, she then realized she's not the only survivor. But now, like across different episodes, are they kind of connecting on, I don't want to say connecting through the trauma, but finding a lot of things in common with other people, like other survivors?
You're right. When survivors do end up finding out about one another, we've seen that happen more than once, where they do have a connection and are finding that, no one else but the other person, no one else but them truly understands the depth of the horror of what they experienced. Even if their situation was different and unique, the fact that they encountered that same monster makes them understand each other in a way that no one else can. And so you're right, they do many times connect with each other. And in the case of the dating killer, Rodney Alcala, where we're talking to a survivor by the name of Morgan Rowan, who for the very first time, decades later, is talking about her encounters with him. She connected with a woman who was only 8 years old when she was kidnapped and attacked by Rodney Alcala. And now they have this friendship. They really are able to support one another and help each other through dark moments that no one else would even begin to understand.
You mentioned Rodney was on that dating game, so he's kind of been called like the dating game killer, the dating show killer. Now, there's been other serial killers in history that people have been like, he's actually a pretty charming, good-looking guy. Do you think that's a common thread, or do you think that's random coincidence? Or are these serial killers sometimes smoother, better communicators, able to trick people into trusting them?
Sometimes they are. We see that in a lot of cases, like the dating game killer that you mentioned, certainly the Ted Bundys of the world. In this particular series, we look at several killers, the Casanova killer, who is Paul John Knowles, as well as a killer that authorities referred to as the handsome devil, a guy named Bruce Lindell, who was known for having these just beautiful, piercing blue eyes. So, yes, you're right. There are some cases where these individuals are so charming. That's part of the psychological makeup of what they're doing, where they're luring people in, and then there's this switch that turns on, and all of a sudden the monster appears. So they have this kind of thrill of hiding this awful secret life behind the persona of kind of the guy next door, the guy you'd trust to walk your dog and, babysit your kids. Turns out to be somebody who is truly the epitome of evil.
You have all different kinds of scenarios and attacks. People are attacked in cars. People are lured through kindness or just sort of playing kidnapped. Is there any sort of thing that we can think about how to avoid getting attacked by a serial killer? Because you don't think about these things on a day-to-day basis. You start reading about this stuff and how, I don't want to say how easily it could have been avoided, but how possible this is to happen to anybody. I don't think these victims are necessarily all the same person. They're smart, they're intelligent, they're wary, they're suspicious of strangers. Is there any way to avoid getting kidnapped by a serial killer?
Man, we would sure like to have those notes, wouldn't we?
Yes.
Kind of like the notebook of what to do and what not to do. And a lot of times these victims we find ask themselves that exact same question. What did I do wrong that this happened to me? Was I in the wrong place? Did I wear the wrong thing? Did I walk down the wrong block? Was I friends with the wrong people? And unfortunately, I guess kind of scarily and chillingly, there's not a list of things that you should do differently or whatever to make sure that you're safe. I mean, this could happen to anyone really at any time. And what we learn a lot about from these survivors is just their deep inner strength and kind of creativity when the survival instincts kick in of all the different ways that they try to figure out a way out. Like if you miss it on Investigation Discovery, by the way, you can also stream these on Max. But with Morgan Rowan, she was attacked in a room in this house and began screaming and making as much noise as she possibly could, even though Rodney Alcala told her that she wasn't allowed to. And in the first instance, her friends hear her screaming and figure out a way to break into this room and rescue her. She's so destroyed by guilt that she even walked into a room with this man. She walked in there and was talking to him, that she blames herself. And so she doesn't tell many people about the attack. I mean, her friends know about it, but she feels shame. And so 3 years later, he attacks her again. He is in a situation where they encounter each other again, and she has to figure out a way out again and manages to, forcefully get herself away from him. He had tried to strangle her, and he thought she was dead at one point, and she does manage to escape. It's really, really horrifying, but at the same time, I think Morgan just shows so much resilience and inspiration that she's able to talk about it now.
He ended up getting captured and put on death row, but eventually, passed away in prison. How hard is it for these victims to talk about these crimes and their ordeal? Some of them haven't really spoken publicly about this. So are there people involved that decided, I can't do this? Was there things you filmed that you're like, it's too much, we can't show this? Because a couple of times these victims have to take a break, or they go back to the place where it happened and they hadn't been there since. So this has to be just massively emotional for them.
Oh, it's very, very emotional. And we try to make it really, really clear at the beginning when we're first talking to survivors about what all this will entail, and help them understand, look, we know that you can imagine how hard this is going to be, but this is going to be really hard. We're going to cover this in People magazine. It's going to be on people.com. It's going to be in front of a camera. Millions of people are going to see it, not only on Investigation Discovery. People are going to, stream it on Max. This is going to be a hard thing to do. You're going back to this place where this awful thing happened. Are you sure you want to? Because we don't ever force anyone into something or try to trick anyone into this. This truly is them directing what they're able to do and what they're not, and them sharing their story themselves. It's really important to us that they have the power in that. And so a lot of times what you're seeing does happen where people say, I need a minute, I can't do this. But we find over and over again that they want to power through, they want to get to the other side of it, because for them, there's a level of healing and saying, this place isn't going to have any power over me anymore. These memories aren't going to have power over me anymore. I'm going to let them out into the world and share them with everyone, see if it helps somebody else, some other victim who feels alone, and then that's going to help me.
Which one out of this 6-part series gives you the creeps the most? Who do you think is just the most evil serial killer, or just for some reason scares you a little bit more?
Oh, boy. They're all petrifying in completely different ways. I think one of the episodes, our very last episode actually, that surprised and shocked and chilled me specifically is about the Cook brothers, who were serial killers operating together. And just that idea of trying to escape one serial killer, one monster, is scary enough and impossible enough. But when you have two together, it's just a double nightmare that, just seems impossible to survive. And so that one in particular, you don't see very many siblings that are working together in this horrific way. And talking to Cheryl Bartlett Fan, who is the survivor there, is just endlessly inspirational to me. I just can't even believe it that she was able to get through that.
It's a question of nature versus nurture. These serial killers, are they coming from these horrible, horrible childhoods with massively evil parents? Or are some of them just evil since day one? Because you read about these, famous serial killers, and some of them, their parents seem kind of normal, and they're like, I don't know. And then others, you're like, boy, that's a rough childhood.
It's so different. It's so different. And I think that the FBI and authorities across the country, if not the world, have spent countless hours trying to answer that very question and figure out what is it that happens here? Is there some kind of common formula that we would be able to know, some kind of profile that would stand up in every single one of these cases? And it's just not the truth. Certainly there are serial killers who had horrific childhoods, but then you have some that it just seems like there was some kind of thing broken in them, that it didn't matter how blessed their childhood was or how many advantages they had. There was still this thing that was wrong with them that just seemed to be in place, for the longest time. So it's such a hard question to answer, and I don't know that we ever will.
So has there been any talk about expanding the 6-part series or having a sequel? Here's my thoughts. After this airs, and it started airing, there's going to be people that are like, oh my God, I can tell my story, or like I have a story. I forget what famous actress it was, but she was like, yeah, Ted Bundy. I actually got into his Volkswagen, but then something happened and I decided this was weird. You hear these stories 20 years later, someone's like, oh yeah, my mom's cousin ran into him. So there's going to be so many people that had run-ins with these evil guys.
Forrest, we've only had one episode air so far, and we've already had people reach out to us. So you've called it. This is exactly the situation where people are going, I am ready to do this. I want to do this now. I hope that we have, another series here, because there are many, many more stories to tell.
How do you sort through people claiming they had a run-in with a serial killer? You also have people that might be making stories up or want the fame. How do you investigate someone's like, oh yeah, I ran into the serial killer? How do you fact check that? I mean, and you're dealing with trauma, so you can't say like, hey, I don't believe you. Let's call the police. Like, that's a real delicate situation.
It's very delicate. And there's a lot of work that goes into trying to vet these stories and make sure that we're doing everything we can to get to the bottom of these cases and the truth. There's a lot of times in the situations that we look at, there are paper trails in these cases, and there are police reports. There are other witnesses. There are people involved that can confirm and can put individuals in places at a particular time. So there's a lot that goes into that, and it's very tricky. Like you said, it's very difficult. It's very delicate. At the same time, it's super important to us as journalists, and some things that we do all the time, which is making sure that when we do bring a story forward, that we know the facts of the case.
You do have police officers and former police officers on the show talking about the crimes, the victims, these serial killers themselves. Policemen are more trained to deal with this, but this is the extreme. You could be a policeman your whole life and not come across something like this. How did they handle it, and what was kind of their attitude talking about these stories?
It is very extreme for law enforcement, and there are many times that they're embracing talking about these cases because in many of them, the cases are still open in a way. There are still questions around victims who have not been confirmed through DNA to be connected to certain serial killers. In the case of Rodney Alcala, when police did arrest him and bring him in, they found a storage unit full of photographs, full of what a serial killer would call mementos, jewelry, earrings, things like that. Many of these items are not connected to a person. So authorities want people to know about it. Like at People Magazine, we've run those photographs, many of those photographs out there in the world so that if somebody recognizes someone, they can come forward and maybe help solve a cold case. Then there's the situations where law enforcement looks back on how they handled the case at the time and feels shame and horror that they didn't handle it differently. Like in the case of the Casanova killer, Barbara may be able, when she came forward to tell police about being attacked by Paul John Knowles, they didn't believe her. And when they look at it now and everything they've learned about investigation and talking to victims, they're horrified that maybe they could have saved someone's life had they believed Barbara at that time. So they come and talk to us in that episode about what they learned and about how police investigation techniques have changed over the years. And that's huge.
Well, it's Alicia Dennis with People Magazine investigates Surviving a Serial Killer, airing Sunday nights on Investigation Discovery and now streaming on Max. Alicia, always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for checking in today and loving the show so far.
Thank you, Forrest. It's always good to have a conversation with you. Your questions are so insightful, and I appreciate us getting to talk about it.